Testing, can you hear that?
There's a cost to doing business, so.
Well, the hour is upon us, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Advanced Plans Committee. And I'd like to open the meeting by taking roll call. Duell is here. Warren?
Here.
Joe Johnson?
Here.
Ox?
Here.
Hartman? Miles? No. McKay?
Here.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes, and we have two sets of minutes to approve. You should have copies of both of them in front of you. The first one is the meeting of January 5th, 2023.
Move for approval.
Okay, second. Okay, it's been moved by McKay and seconded by Johnson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed, no, none. We don't have anybody on remote at this point, I don't believe. The second set of minutes is for the January 19th meeting.
Move for approval.
Okay, second. It's been moved by Joe Johnson, seconded by McKay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same
Abstaining.
Abstain,
Abstain.
yes, that's correct. And the only other one that was absent on those meetings was Cindy Miles. Okay. So moving on, the next item is
Bob,
down-
excuse me, Bob.
pardon? Oh, okay. Hi, Cindy. Can you hear me? Cindy? Unmute yourself. Cindy, can you hear us? Well, we will let Scott take care of that. The next item on the agenda is the downtown parking and multimodal plan. You have a copy of the presentation in front of you on that. Tia Mott and Mallory Baker will make the presentation on this. Mary, do you have anything else?
Nothing from me.
Okay. Are they here?
Tia, we're ready for you. She's trying to.
Oh, okay, good. Bear with us a minute. By the way,
I can't hear you.
good, good.
I just couldn't get off mute.
The city council last week approved the downtown street restriping that we approved in our last meeting. I assume you all were aware of that.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Tia Ramat. I'm a transportation planner with the city of Wichita. We are right now trying to get Mallory Baker with Walker Consultants. She's in Denver on the Zoom call with me to co-present this presentation. If we don't succeed, I'll be doing it solo. This plan has been around since 2018. And it's really also like the downtown streets plan. It's a complementing plan addressing the downtown streets from Murdoch to Kellogg, the rivers to Washington, more or less, is kind of the break point. And really, this plan is unique in that it's a policy level document. It's not really a physical plan that talks about where parking should go. It talks about how to manage parking. Like both of these plans were proposed initially in 2010 by the adopted project downtown master plan for Wichita. And it's taken 13 years to get to this point. I believe you guys were presented this plan last July. And so this presentation may look slightly familiar. But this will be the second go around, and I'd really, like we did with the streets plan, I'd like to walk all the way through it. And if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me, or if you'd like to hold the questions to the end, I'll leave that to your chairperson to determine how he'd like to structure that. So, and I wonder what Scott's up to. Do you have any initial questions or comments about this plan that's coming to you and to? Oh, do you have any initial thoughts you'd like to share about this plan coming back to you today? I know I almost feel like I need to apologize to you as a body to bring you plans and to bring them to Planning Commission on the same day. But these plans were both hung up with COVID, and leadership has expressed some desire to get them moving as quickly as possible. So that's why you're seeing these two plans come. Oh, there she is. I'd like to introduce you to Mallory Baker. Mallory, you're showing is muted online, just so you know.
I'm here, Tia. I can hear you all. Can you all hear me?
Excellent.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thanks so much. Talk
Okay.
soon.
Well, I'll frame up the initial part of this presentation. Mallory really is the national expert in how other cities and parking in general is managed. I think she'll speak to the processes and strategies that are within this document much more eloquently and much more thoroughly than I will. So today's agenda, please advance to the next slide. We are going to be talking about the multimodal plan. I'll provide a quick overview of the objectives and the planning context behind the plan, and Mallory will speak to the core challenges and take it from the vision statement forward to discuss the strategies within the plan and the community and the engagement that happened in 2018, 2019, and part of 2020 before this plan kind of got hung up. So I hope that's about as much as we can do. So go ahead to the next slide. This plan really was completed in 2020 prior to COVID, and the ability to host meetings kind of stalled out. It's a guide to help the city achieve community goals by improving parking conditions for everybody who wants to park downtown. Right now, we have a whole lot of free parking, a whole lot of empty parking lots, and a whole lot of clusters where people circle the block endlessly looking for an open spot near their destination. And we really want to utilize some pragmatic methods for making open parking available by using a progression of strategies that start, like, for example, if occupancy hits a certain level, we'll start imposing time limits on parking to discourage all-day workers from parking on a certain block face. And if the time limits don't provide enough options for people who want to come during the middle of the day and park, we may impose some sort of a cost on parking where it's in very high demand, but we'll get to that later. This plan involved a lot of collaboration with the city staff, a new steering committee, neighborhood groups, everything. We had to walk all the way through it again since we picked up this plan a year and a half ago, very much like the downtown streets plan. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This is the area that this parking study covers. It includes the Delano district, the government district, Century 2, Water Walk, Arena, and Old Town districts. So it really covers the bulk of where the city owns parking in downtown Wichita. Go ahead to the next slide, please. The current process and of what we're doing here, it looks very much like what the downtown streets plan did. I've given this presentation to almost every DAB. to the Bike Ped Advisory Board, the Transit Advisory Board, downtown Wichita, and we're just trying to tee it up for city council consideration. I don't think that that will happen until April, but that's kind of the timeline that we're on at this point. Please go to the next slide. I'll go ahead and skip this one. And before I go to planning context, I want to just add a little piece of context to you for you about this. The city, and I'm not trying to steal any thunder here, owns a tremendous amount of parking downtown, and I'm charged with managing it for the city. I have one contract with the car park, and they do a lot of the parking garages and the day-to-day things that need to be done. I have one enforcement agent currently, and the overall parking fund for the city, loses money year after year, and that's been a trend since 2018. So what we're trying to do is reverse that trend and at least make the city whole because they hold all of these assets, and we just need to manage them better. So with that, Mallory, I'd invite you to go ahead and pick up the presentation.
Thank you, Tia. Good morning, all. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I know that this material might feel familiar to many of you who have been at our other presentations over the course of the last several months. So really appreciate your time and attention. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mallory Baker. I'm a senior consultant with Walker Consultants, which is a broad-based national parking and transportation planning and design firm. I'm based out of our Denver, Colorado office, and was involved extensively in the formation of this plan back when we worked on it in 2018 through 2020, just prior to COVID hitting our nation. So really excited to be back in Wichita and just work on hopefully adopting this plan, which is really a framework for the future of parking and the long-term sustainability and health of Wichita's parking system. So we first wanted to talk about the foundation upon which these recommendations, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, rest. So that the planning context, the key guiding principles that were leveraged as we developed recommendations. One is the importance of parking management. So as Tia just mentioned, Wichita owns, operates, and/or manages a really substantial amount of parking. So 13,000 spaces roughly in all across that study area that Tia showed. So we know also that parking supply is not the only factor that matters when it comes to the efficiency and effectiveness of a parking system. It also needs to be managed actively and strategically. And when a parking system isn't managed, when you just rely on the supply to sort of support the needs of many residents, visitors, customers, all of that, it can result in user frustration, frustrating user experiences, unbalanced demand, and really a lack of return on investment, which can lead to long-term challenges with the sustainability and health of that system. In addition, we know that Wichita is really excited and supporting a multimodal environment for all Wichitans. So really encouraging travel choices, supporting the ability of people to choose how they want to get to those destinations that they go to on a daily basis. So we know that parking management will help support that long-term development of a more multimodal environment, more choice for Wichitans in the long term. And that is supported also by the pedestrian and bicycle master plans that Wichita is working on currently. Next slide. We know that Wichita has a number of core challenges that are still true today. So I want us to understand that, you know, we worked on this plan back in 2018 and 2019. So that's when we collected quantitative data, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the core challenges, based on our conversations with staff, based on our observations of the current system, really remain the same. Number one, we know that Wichita is in transformation in terms of development and the transportation behaviors and demographics of the Wichita community. So we need parking management to support this transformation and really help people understand the value of the city's curb space, you know, those on-street areas, as well as the parking assets that it funds with its money. We also know that parking supply really in aggregate far exceeds demand. So in total, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, back in 2018 and still true today, the total amount of supply that we have is really far, far, far greater than how much demand, how many actual vehicles are parked in that supply. However, that doesn't mean that there still aren't areas where demand is intense and where people have frustrating parking experience. So what that tells us is we can't solve these challenges with adding supply. We need to focus on managing the inventory that we have to reduce those demand challenges that we're experiencing today. Next slide. So I don't want to get too hung up on this or spend too much time here, but just to give you a glimpse of what we found back in 2018, really what these charts show, the sort of long and short of it is demonstrative of what I just shared, which is really the total amount of supply in aggregate, in total across those areas and within each individual neighborhood really far exceeds the actual demand, and utilization, so occupancy of vehicles compared to supply is well below industry averages or what you're trying to reach when you're efficiently using a parking asset. So what this is telling us again, and what we've confirmed with staff is still true today, is that we need to focus on managing the assets rather than adding supply. Next slide, please. So again, just a quick demonstration of this. And I think, while things have changed since this data was collected in 2018, and keep in mind, this is a 2018 map, there are, in aggregate, again, those big green areas, those were, very underutilized back when we collected this data. However, that does not mean that in some areas, for example, along Douglas Ave, you don't have frustrating user experiences where demand is intense and parking is hard to find. So again, just underscoring, the overall direction and framing of the recommendations that we've pursued with this plan. Next slide. So some other core challenges, as we mentioned, Wichita manages a really substantial amount of parking across these study areas, 13,000 spaces in surface lots, structures, as well as our on-street parking assets. It's expensive to manage, especially when it comes to structures, which could have, structural integrity challenges. They need regular maintenance and restoration. And there needs to be a clear value proposition for these assets. And we also need to make sure that we can fund effective and sustainable maintenance for those assets. We also know that the parking industry is changing, and there are many different user-friendly and technologically advanced options for us to better manage parking, balance demand, support other modes of travel, and also address those localized shortages and demand challenges that we see in the city. Next slide. So the first step in developing our recommendations, once we had that foundation of guiding principles, we understood what core challenges we were trying to reach, is we worked with our steering committee, and we confirmed again with our new reprise steering committee as part of this plan adoption effort, a vision statement. What are we trying to achieve? So the only comment I've heard so far in this vision statement is 2040, that's too far away. We want this to happen sooner, and we hope to make that happen. But here is our vision statement. I'll just read it to you. In 2040, the city of Wichita will be a community where parking contributes to the civic, social, and economic vitality of the community. Parking will be a high-quality, integral part of a dynamic, connected, and seamless multimodal transportation system. And the city's parking system will strive to be convenient and efficient for a diverse and comprehensive range of users. So that's the mountain that we're trying to climb, and what our recommendations help us achieve. Next slide, please. So we develop strategies and recommendations in 3 key buckets. And the first of these buckets is really focused on the day-to-day parking management and really the user experience when it comes to using parking across Wichita's study areas. Next slide. So these are the strategies that we're focusing on when it comes to parking management. Number 1, we really want to leverage technology and the technology that's available to improve the customer experience. What that means is, there are many different user-friendly technologies out there and available to us, and we can leverage them in ways that help people find parking more easily and use parking more easily so that their experience is efficient and effective. Strategy 2, we want to improve parking enforcement operations and appropriately fund parking enforcement so we can encourage turnover and efficiently use those parking assets that we have available to us. Number 3, we want to address parking shortages strategically by linking applicable restrictions to occupancy levels. And here is that framework, those trigger points that Tia was mentioning in her introduction before I started speaking. Where we have those demand challenges, where we have those demand shortages, we can leverage parking management, for example, time limits and active enforcement in those areas strategically, so we can mitigate those demand distribution issues that we're experiencing today. So it's really about leveraging our assets, deploying our resources effectively to reduce demand shortages and challenges. Next slide, please. So the second bucket that we have here is organization, administration, and funding. So this is kind of the backbone infrastructure to support the parking management initiatives that we just discussed. Next slide. The strategies that we have here are, number 1, continue to consolidate transportation function administration into a single department. And Wichita is already doing that. We just want to make sure that we're supporting the ability to reduce duplicative effort across staff and across departments so we can have one single department that's responsible for conducting these activities. So we're already well on the road to achieving that. Strategy 5, we would like to reduce general fund subsidies for regular operations of the parking and multimodal fund. So really just subsidies is not a correct word, but really we want to improve the financial sustainability of the parking and multimodal fund well into the future to make sure that regular operations, enforcement, resource deployment, what the parking and multimodal fund needs to fund its day-to-day activities is funded by itself, by its own revenues well into the future. And strategy 6 is really to improve the financial health and the long-term sustainability of the parking and multimodal fund in terms of repairs and maintenance of parking assets. So we would like to, in the future, have revenues and make sure that revenues into the parking and multimodal fund can pay for regular repairs and maintenance of the parking assets necessary to the operation of that fund. Next slide, please. So the final strategy is design and community strategy. So really thinking about how the parking and multimodal system integrates and interacts with our urban design and other initiatives that our community is pursuing. Next slide. So here we have support design guidelines that provide for greater mobility choice and enhance the environment for biking, transit, as well as cars and all other modes of transportation. So really, this is just throwing our support behind Wichita's pursuit of a more multimodal environment through the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, as well as any other initiatives that support transportation choice. Strategy 8, we would like to improve the communication of parking and transportation information to the public and stakeholders. So making sure that we're using digital methods and on-the-ground methods to make sure that the general Wichita community understands what parking assets or options are available to them when they go to different places, and they understand, how we're spending the money from the parking and multimodal fund. Strategy 9 is really using strategic investments from the parking and multimodal fund to support the community. So that could mean, leveraging underutilized parking assets throughout the community to support revitalization and new development in various parts of Wichita and within the study area. Next slide, please. So we wanted to briefly touch upon, what community engagement and collaboration work went into the original development of this plan. So really understanding how the community influenced the formation of the 2020 parking and multimodal plan, so that we can, understand how the community participated in the formation of these recommendations and strategies. We really had a robust community collaboration effort, and we were proud of the amount of participation we got. We had over 1,000 participants, from community members to neighborhood leaders, business owners, representatives from various agencies, to help develop the plan. And we'll talk a little bit about the different iterations of that community collaboration process. Please go ahead to the next slide. So we had a steering committee that has in fact been reprised as part of this plan adoption formation, and we've met with them a number of times again over the course of this adoption process in 2022 and 2023. But the original steering committee met 6 times over the course of plan development, and they were really integral in terms of, any course correction and just supporting the plan's connection to community desires and wishes from a broad range of perspectives. So we had representatives from the City Council, the WDDC, Visit Wichita, the Downtown Neighborhood Association, Old Town, Delano, the Transit Advisory Board, Wichita Chamber of Commerce, the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and local businesses. Next slide, please. We also had these focus groups within the neighborhoods in which we were working. And what we did here was really met people where they were at, within these communities to hold focus groups, visioning sessions and direction building sessions around strategies. You can see some photos from those focus group meetings here. We met in Old Town, Douglas Design District, Delano, nearby the Wichita State University, and as well as the Downtown Chamber of Commerce. Next slide. We also leveraged online initiatives, and this was prior to COVID, back when you did a lot more in person, but we had a lot of online and social media activity. We had a community-wide survey that was issued through SurveyMonkey with nearly 900 responses. And we also had some really active participation and excitement, social media posting, participation from local businesses and neighborhood associations, as well as nonprofit organizations citywide. Next slide. We also had a public open house in November of 2018 where folks shared their thoughts, and we had a lot of activity and participation in that open house. Next slide, please. I wanted to touch briefly on the key themes that we heard from those conversations. Number one, we wanted to invest more in existing physical parking infrastructure. So what we heard from the community was there are a number of parking assets that are really in disrepair, unclean, poorly lit. So really making sure that the parking structures that we have, the parking assets that we have are fit to serve the Wichita community. So not, building more supply, but really focusing on making sure that the parking assets that we have today are fit to serve our community in all the ways that they need. People were really excited about the new multimodal Wichita that they were seeing, more infrastructure for bicycles and pedestrians, transit options. So people wanted to see more investment and support of those multimodal options, as well as supportive tools like signage and wayfinding at all levels of transportation. People were incredibly excited about the redevelopment that they were seeing in their downtown and in their neighborhood. So they wanted to look at parking strategies that would support new development and redevelopment and continue that trend towards an even more vital Wichita. And finally, people were excited by advancements in technology in transportation and parking. So they wanted to see recommendations that would leverage that technology and improve their experiences. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, an old slide, but we have finalized the recommendations. We've determined any gaps, and really what we mean by gaps is, this is setting up a framework that's really a process for staff to undertake. So the recommendations are really framing up future work that staff must continue to do, data collection procedures, analysis that they have to do to determine what is the exact appropriate step within the parking management framework to take. So we've determined what that would look like for staff to undertake in the coming years. And we've also met with many boards and committees over the course of late 2022, and will continue to do so today with this meeting and with our planning commission meeting later this afternoon in preparation for our conversation with City Council in April, hopefully. So with that, we'll open it up. And again, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your attention to this matter. I know parking is not the most exciting thing that you all deal with, but we are just very grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you about this framework and are excited to bring it forward.
Thank you, Mallory.
Do we have any questions? Yes, Mr. Warren.
Mallory's several times in your presentation, you use the term leverage and use technology. Can you give us some examples of how technology can help with this?
Yes, absolutely. So a few things I'll say on a number of ways. A number of technologies can really help at various touch points of the parking experience. One might be technology, so applications on mobile devices or websites that would help with people with trip planning or choosing a parking option. So that's something that we might look at. And I'm not going to talk about specific vendors because we are vendor neutral. We don't want, we're not supporting or sponsoring any particular vendor. So I'm just going to speak generally to the technological options and choices available. So trip planning, choosing a parking asset before they make the trip to make that experience a little bit more frictionless. Another technology initiative might be digital signage and wayfinding. So if you've ever been driving in a community and have seen a wayfinding sign that's active or dynamic, we can use that signage to help point people in the direction of parking facilities and options that have utilization or have availability. So have space available for people to park. Those systems are called automated parking guidance systems, and they've been really enormously helpful in communities that have a wide variety of parking assets. They can send data back to staff so staff can understand where they have availability, and it can also help direct people on the roadways so they can make good, smart parking decisions and also reduce things like excessive circulation in your downtown and congestion. Finally, we can leverage technology in the way of enforcement and in the way of parking pricing and paid parking. So we know that Wichita currently has some areas where there are meters. Currently, those meters are fairly antiquated and coin operated. Of course, most of the meters today still allow for people to use coins to pay for trips, but we can also integrate that with mobile application payments and credit card payments just to make that experience a bit more seamless. And finally, we can also leverage technology in enforcement. So currently, most of the enforcement done in Wichita is minimal and done manually. We can use technology to help make that enforcement experience easier and more accurate and precise.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Fox?
The two-way street conversion to one-way street conversions to two-way, does that by itself help improve parking accessibility and ease of finding? Or do these two things kind of have to go together?
They do go together. And the two-way street conversions will stop the snaking around the streets and allow people to drive more directly to their destinations. And some of the two-way street conversions will also reassign where parking goes. We have a lot of on-street parking that is underutilized in downtown Wichita.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, Mr. McKay.
Well, that's the same question I did when we talked about the street reconfiguration stuff. This was started in 2018. Especially the downtown core area and the Douglas and Broadway area is probably the hottest development area around, with the hospital and the medical facility. We've got the arena. We're going to add some more to the stadium area. And has this been updated to kind of carry that? Because I'm looking at your picture, your picture here, and like, for example, you included Delano, but most of the stuff you got in here is privately owned.
Mhm.
How do you, and it's the way it is around the arena. An awful lot of around the arena is privately owned.
That's true.
And being one of the owners of property around the arena, I guess my self-interest is how's that going to work when we're planning on already, didn't we approve to put a hotel and some other stuff over around the stadium? And so that,
Yes.
right now, we took away a whole lot of the parking at the stadium and people are walking 2 or 3, so how have we updated this to conform to what's happening, and we know what's going to happen in the future in the next 5 years?
We haven't updated.
2018, they weren't even there.
We have not updated the data. It's incredibly labor intensive to go out and survey all 13,000 parking spaces for occupancy. And really what we're looking at with this plan is the framework offered within the plan to see if leadership will buy into the logic of it.
Yeah,
If
I
this,
can, oh,
oh,
sorry.
go ahead, Natalie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So that's an excellent question and a question that we've had a number of times over the course of the plan. So thank you for asking it. Tia is right that and you're right, we collected this data back in 2018, but really what it's telling us is a story that can help us make decisions in the future. But this, as Tia mentioned, this plan is a framework. It's really a decision-making tree almost. So staff will need to continually, and this plan encourages and recommends this. Staff will need to go out and collect data regularly in the system. So right now, there isn't a regimented process that parking staff uses, or the resources available to go out and collect data actively. So that's why this data is a little bit antiquated. But if this plan is adopted, staff will be going out regularly, collecting data and using that data to make decisions that are, triggered by different frameworks within this plan. So as you say, a lot has changed since 2018. And in fact, transportation behaviors more generally and universally have changed since COVID and since a number of other things have happened. But this plan really just kind of cues us up and gives staff the resources and ability to go out and collect that data so they can use this framework to make decisions. So for example, with that new development that you were discussing, what this plan would enable us to do is go out to those areas, collect data, understand the intensity of parking in those areas, and then choose to make a parking management decision in that area based on what we're seeing on the ground. And another thing I want to say is, just because this plan focuses on parking management initiatives and maintaining existing assets, it doesn't completely disable the city from making an investment in a parking structure in the future. It's just that we need to follow the path of, first you make this choice and see how that works, then you make this choice, and then you scale up, and then maybe you add inventory if none of that is working, because we need to be strategic about, the expense of adding inventory when it's unnecessary and when there are other ways to mitigate the challenges that we're seeing on the ground.
And the first thing to managing any asset is you need to really know what you have. And right now there's a lot of technology on the market that would tell us more about parking occupancy that's not being used in this city. This really is about making smarter and more pragmatic decisions moving forward, rather than overbuilding the parking and continuing with that sort of a trend with development. Yes, sir.
Since the plan is out of date, why wouldn't we just approve the framework for the staff to use?
Well, that is what the plan is. I don't think the plan necessarily does anything other than set up the framework.
That's correct. The plan recommendations, which we've discussed, are that framework. The data informed, helped, tell us a bit about the Wichita system, but that's an appendix to the plan. The plan itself that you would be adopting and recommending today, we hope, will really just be this framework and decision-making tree for staff to use in future decisions about parking management in Wichita.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, John.
Well,
Mr.
I'm
McKay.
having a little problem with the fact that we're asking this committee here to approve this and move forward. We've seen it for the first time in 5 years, I guess you might say, theoretically. And now we're going to go to the planning commission, and they've not seen it since any time. And to me, it's fast tracking it. It's not going to be approved until April. Is that what you said?
That's right.
So the process, I'd kind of like to see, we come here, look at it, take it, and you make the presentation to planning commission, but not with a recommendation until after we've had a chance to review and get any comments from the whole planning commission. And then let the staff come back to this committee with some kind of a semi-recommendation based upon all the hearing of the full planning commission.
I think
So your recommendation would be for us, we need to take action on this today. We could approve it, but not to be presented to the full planning commission until maybe the next meeting, not today, to give them a chance to review this data. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying what we got today is the plan. We got a shortened version, we got the long version of the plan. So whatever, and the rest of the planning commission may get it today. It's the first time I had a chance to look at it, and you're asking them to approve it and to go forward with it. All I'm saying to you is let's do due process. And we've looked at it. We go to the planning commission, say, this committee's looked at it and say, we'd like for it to go to the full planning commission to review it. And if there's any comments, come back to the staff, and the staff wants to bring back to us, then we say, we go back with a recommendation. It may be a bureaucracy situation, but everybody's on the same basis, I guess.
Okay, before we, excuse me, Scott, would you like to make a comment?
I was just going to make sure that I was hearing it correctly. So Mr. McKay, I think your recommendation is we've had the discussion here, then to have it again, have the presentation this afternoon at the MAPC, take any feedback that's received at both of these committees, take it back to staff, see if any changes or adjustments are needed, and then bring it back to the next advanced plans meeting.
Yeah, because like Joe said, it's incomplete because of its time element more than anything else. And that, if it was going to say we got to approve it by the 26th of March or something like that, we're talking about in April. So that's another, month or so. I think we can do the process that way. I don't think it's going to make that much difference, except the fact that I feel a little uncomfortable. Something that was put together 5 years ago, especially in the downtown area where so much have happened in the last 3 to 4 years. It's just.
Well, I guess.
Pardon me. I'm not in opposition to the program. I'm just saying the due process how that go through.
So then I think a question real quick would be to Tia. What would that do to your schedule if it was brought back to the advanced plans meeting for March? Would be on
my
March
goodness,
9th.
that would put some question marks in it. I don't have my computer here to look. I suppose we could. I wouldn't have the benefit of Mallory's expertise on March 9th. Really, what was presented today really is what's in this document. And I think for some of you, I know Mr. Johnson's seen this presentation at least 4 times now. I hear you, Mr. Commissioner. Okay, I really do. But I guess we could come back.
Before we take any action on this, I've got a couple of questions. One, if the proposal that we are being presented with is basically to allow staff to continue to move forward on this and make concrete recommendations at some point in the future, my question is, has there been any kind of a budget put together for this? How many city staff would be involved in this moving forward?
We're trying to get the plan adopted first. I have not put a budget to paper for what it will take to implement this plan.
Okay. But being fully adopted means what you presented today, which is a general description of where you're going, but there's no specific requests in this request today as to change this parking or that parking or change any city codes regarding parking.
No.
There's no specific actions, right?
There's no specific action here. This is a generalized and it's really about a framework that staff would work with city council to begin implementing. I don't think I would have any authority to make hard and fast decisions about paid parking anywhere in the city without some amount of city council.
The other question I
oversight.
had was in the handout that we have on page 10, there's a map and there's a legend up here on it. And then in these little square blocks, I guess they are, there's numbers in there. That's the second map in what we had handed out. What do these percentages in the legend represent? It's a percentage of what?
I believe it's percentage of occupancy. Mallory, can you confirm that?
These are just block numbers.
Your
So
block number?
we use in this map are just block numbers. So they just, and I have to pull up the plan to determine what map exactly is being referred to. But these numbers here are just block numbers that were a cross-reference for our data collection purposes. So you could say this block has this inventory and this occupancy.
If I could, I'll add that, Mr. Dool, great question. The numbers in the circles are the block numbers, as Mallory has referenced. And those are the ones that, the reason why they have block numbers is because they correlate to the survey sheets. When we went out and we measured how many cars, counted how many cars were parked in a given area, we would use the block number to be able to reference that. Then the colors that you see, the lines with the colors are on-street parking. And so that goes with the legend. So if you see a yellow line, that means that that's on-street parking in that area is 50 to 69% occupied. Now, if you look at the blocks that have color in them, so there's a lot of green blocks, there's an orange area down by Century 2, that means that the parking that's off-street was at a certain percentage of occupancy based on the color.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Warren.
My mind's going a little, I'm hearing John here on this, but I'm not sure that what the whole MAPC may be. My thinking would be to advance it to the full body without recommendation one way or the other. If they feel, as John does, we need more time to dig into the weeds of this thing, then we can defer it. If not, then we would have the option to go ahead and approve it, because I'm looking at it, and my level of concern is I think this is a step forward. I'm ready to go, but I can certainly see what John's saying. And if the rest of the MAPC is uncomfortable going forward at this point until they study it more, then we have the option to defer this afternoon.
That's basically
Before we
what my
call the
question
question,
was.
excuse me, go ahead. I was just going to say, before we call the question, is there any other discussion on this? Yes, Scott.
So I'd like to add a couple of things, because I know that being advanced plans, I know that you really like to sink your teeth into the details. And because staff have been so generous as to provide a copy of the plan, I would just like to point out a couple of things after having worked on this plan, which may help with your comfort level, or at least with your, you may feel hopefully that you've got a better understanding of it, which is I'd like to reference page 17, and I'll just kind of take you through some of the plan ever so briefly, if you don't mind. It's the big one with the flag on the front. Yep. So knowing that you like to dig into the details, I would just point out that on page 17, this is the city of Wichita has a mission statement. And as part of that mission, there are 4 really important points, which is safety, infrastructure, economy, and living conditions for living well. And page 17 really spells out how parking and how this plan help achieve the city's mission, right? And so really, why is this plan in existence? Why do we even have parking? In order to help achieve community goals. And we can see that those are very broad items, but it's to show that this matches up with those. Then on page 18, you see where the strategies and actions come into the plan. And so these are the things that are recommended. And on page 19, there's a full listing of them about what specific strategies should be done as part of this plan, what's recommended in this plan. And then if you go to page 21, you just kind of browse through it. You see these pages with tables on them. There are specific actions listed under each strategy. And so we talked about technology, and this references some of those. Talks about updating parking meters is number 1, updating parking garage technology, allowing mobile payment, number 3. So you can see that the details. It doesn't say exactly how to do it, but it says these are the things that we need to be working on in the future. Then you flip through those, and I think the next important page may be page 33. So we're gonna, so you can see where all those are in there. We're gonna go past that. On page 33 is a really, really core piece of this. And this is what Tia and Mallory have been talking about quite a bit, which is that framework about how you manage parking. So this talks about, if you're observing parking rates, these boxes, if you walk through these boxes, it basically describes the process that you would go through. Now, a real important point is that with parking, 85% occupancy and above is considered like it's full. And the goal is to keep at about 85%, somewhere in there, so that you've always got 1 to 2 spaces that are open on a particular block face or as part of a percentage that's open on your parking. So this is, when we talk about endorsing the plan, whether the plan is outdated or old, and when they talk about having a framework, this is part of the framework that they're talking about. It's not necessarily having the numbers, but rather having this where you would go out, you would count, you would survey to see how many parking spaces are filled. Then you would use this rubric, this logic, to determine what needs to happen. Do you need to impose time limits, or do you need to take away time limits, or do you charge more? Do you charge less? There's a lot of the back and forth that could happen on this about the process.
I believe that this gives people a way to make decisions so that we know that this area is developing. Well, maybe then data is collected there according to this process, and we can focus on the areas that are the current hotspots or problem areas first. And the plan, the data, and the budget follow. Is that correct way of thinking of it?
It is, because
So it's really a decision-making model that the city says we're going to use this whenever a parking issue comes up. So we systematically address.
exactly, because parking is really about getting access, right? And with the new development and new intensity that would come in and vibrancy in downtown, parking is going to become even more important because there's going to be more people looking for the same parking spaces. So how we manage it is going to be critically important. The other thing too that I would point out is that in the back, in the appendices, and I'm trying to find the page where it starts, there's a whole section on the public engagement process. But on page 63 in the back of the document, this is the data that is a bit outdated. This is where the survey, the occupancy survey data is contained. It's not actually part of it's attached to the plan, but it's not the plan recommendation. It's data that was used to help come up with some of the recommendations.
Yes, Mr. McKay.
I think 13 page 13 or 17 would have been in the presentation. A lot of my questions would have been answered. That's the goals and objectives and the mission statement of the city and why we're putting this together.
Mhm.
Rather than going into detail about what we're going to do this and all the maps, whether there's going to be a sidewalk here or something else. That's
That's very good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I
well,
think,
no, I mean,
I'd like to make
and
a motion.
and that was one of the reasons why I was saying,
Mhm.
we'll let them look at it. Was for that this very reason. If Scott hadn't went through and explained some of these pages,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not against the
Oh, no,
what's
whenever.
happening. I'm just simply stating that there's got to be some kind of a process, the reason why we're doing it. And then page 17 almost hits it right on the head while we're going through this thing. And we know that the strategy is going to change, but in the streets, we talked about, you know, one of the things we had a problem with was Broadway south and north of Douglas. If the street's narrow, so it can't be a carte blanche. There's got to be some adjustments made. That's basically why we got had a mission statement for the street. So you've got this now, why the parking has to go along, and it needs to be said. It's in conjunction with the street project. So the full commission has a chance to look at it.
And I think you've made a really good point, which is contrasting it with the downtown streets plan, which is location specific and what's going to happen on this particular street. This plan is different because it's more of a process driven. So you would go out, evaluate that street, determine what's happening with the parking, and then take the appropriate recommended parking management steps.
So it's really not a plan that we're approving. It's really a process we're approving. And I'd
Well-
like to make a motion that we approve the data here as a basis for the staff to use in forming recommendations back to us.
Second.
Okay.
I
Let
think your
me
mission-
ask
Joe, I think
first
your
if
mission
there's any
statement's
more
gotta be
discussion.
Mentioned there. And part of the mission statement.
It's in there. I mean,
What I'm saying, that needs to be referred. Whatever we're going to do needs to use that as a reference. That's why we're bringing it back to the reference, whatever the reference. Because of that mission statement,
Just to make sure we're following procedure, I want to make sure that we've had all of the input before we call the question. Is there any more input? If not, I'll call the question. Joe, would you like to make that motion?
It If I could, sir, the data and the process in here is important, but the reason why we call it a plan, and I think you've raised a great question, is because there are action steps and strategies in here that are recommended in addition with the practice and the methodology. And those action steps, if they're not included, I'm afraid that we could have the process, but it would be technically difficult to achieve it in a streamlined way. It really points a step forward for budget purposes and also for capital improvement purposes as well as staffing and programs. So we really would look forward to that. So, you know, if you're in favor of it, a possible action could be to recommend endorsement of the plan, and then it would have that. Now, it could be, yeah, we can work on some tweaks. I mean, people have mentioned that it could be out of date. Maybe we can change the cover page so it says 2023, but we can work on that.
I guess I'm still in favor of endorsing the plan as a guideline for staff to provide
Is there a second?
for information back to us.
Second.
Okay. Ms. Miles, second.
Yes.
Any further discussion?
Yes, you. Page 17 of this document here, you're not even gonna reference it? You're not even gonna reference it? Well, but
If page 17 were added to the presentation to MAPC this afternoon. And then if if we recommend, we say we're comfortable, we want them to hear the mission statement and see page 17 specifically.
Mhm.
And then if they're not comfortable, then we would have to defer the vote.
You need to
So-
reference back to the reason why.
Yeah.
Mr.
you.
Johnson, do you accept that change?
I certainly do.
Okay, we have a second?
Second.
Yes. Okay, all those in favor, excuse me. We just talked about that, and generally in this meeting, we allow the public to speak at the end, but I would be receptive if somebody from the Republic wants to weigh in on this point. You've got 3 minutes to talk, and that's all.
Come on.
Hi, this is Alan Kaler. I am the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board and also a member of Bike Walk Wichita. This has been presented to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board, which voted to go ahead and recommend it. And I think some of the comments on the Planning Commission are correct. I had somewhat to the same reaction on some of it. Is that this is, as in my words, not the staff's words, a plan to make a plan. And I think that it is necessary to take this step in order to have for the staff and the city to have the authority to move forward on thinking about what they're going to do with the parking on it in the downtown area. As has been pointed out, this doesn't prescribe any particular solutions, any particular actions to be taken with respect to any specific properties or anything like that. What it does is enable the staff to come to look at it, make recommendations, which will then be brought to the city council and the various advisory boards for specific action. So the Bicycle and Pedestrian Board and I am in favor of the plan as it is, as a whole, recognizing that, as I say, how I view it as a plan to come up with a plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public present? Go ahead.
My name is Lee McLeod and I live at 2708 West Benjamin Drive. I'm the president of the Neighborhood Association in Benjamin Hills and Pleasant Valley. But primarily, I am a volunteer. As a retiree, that's about the main thing that we get to do anymore is volunteer. And I've been impressed recently by seeing how the city has used volunteers to count homeless people and count bicyclists. They have designated a day and a time and trained the volunteers. And when I heard that the comment about we would have staff going out to count this, it seemed like that would be very prohibitive cost of counting parking spaces that were occupied or not occupied. And if you could use volunteers or the owners of some of those lots, as Mr. McKay mentioned that he owns some of the properties around the arena, perhaps as getting that kind of input rather than paying for volunteer staff time to go out and do that would be much more wise and prudent. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public, either present or virtual, that would like to make comments on this? Anyone else? Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, we understand what the motion is. Please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for your input. The next item on our agenda is a notification inquiry, and the one after that also is being covered by Mary Hunt, so I will defer to her. Good. Yeah, I would take some, thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're continuing our discussion on notification on zoning cases. Up until now, we've talked about and got everybody up to speed on how we notify and when we're sending out letters on particular cases and at what distances we use. This is in your memo, but when we have a small area, we have a smaller area of notification. When we have larger areas or out in the county, we go up as far as 1,000 feet in notifying people with letters of a particular case. We've also gone over things like protest petitions and what the law allows. The law allows us to go beyond the state statutes in terms of notification. That's a local decision. But when it comes to protest petitions, they're very, very strict on what that is, and that's not up to us to decide. So next slide, please, type in. Okay, we reviewed cities in Kansas, we reviewed cities outside of Kansas. And we have received comments from on occasion from people who say, hey, I wasn't notified. I thought I should have been notified. I live close enough, or maybe they heard about it and they were, concerned about not being notified. And in order to keep going, of course, we've got the cost to add more residents on a notification. And of course, the concern there is it costs the applicant more money, it costs the city more money. But it also, we have to ask the question, are we reaching the people that need to be notified? Or are there people so far away that want to be notified and will keep sending letters out and they're really not concerned about it at all? So that's just something we have to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so in your memo, we selected 4 planning cases. We didn't just do it ad hoc. We selected cases that were in the city and the county. We added cases that had smaller notification areas, some that had larger notification areas, and tried to just get a quick glimpse at what those particular cases involved. And so, so we obtained the number of non-property owners from those cases, and we estimated the cost to mail them letters. Next slide. Okay, so not to get too into the weeds here, but basically what we had across, if this can hear it, but we have a case with 22 properties, a case with 42 properties, one with 75 and one with 87. I will tell you anecdotally that our administrative staff tell us that generally we are sending out letters between 60 and 80 per case on average. There obviously are smaller notification areas. If there are really large lots, that will reduce the number of people being notified. But we estimated that it costs approximately $2.64 to mail a letter to anyone. And I've got two columns here on the left where we have the applicant's costs. They right today pay $150 as a flat fee. That will get them 10 addresses. So it's $15 an address, and then it's $15 per address thereafter. So that's their cost. And then our cost is the notification, which is $2.64. That does not include the newspaper notification or the signs that go out, that sort of thing. This is just about mailing out letters. So we have these 4 cases. And the one with 22 properties, we pulled their notification list that's provided by the title company, and they only had 2 addresses that were what we would call a renter, or it's not occupied by the owner of the property. Then we had one with 42 properties. They had 1. We had 75 properties on this PUD case. It had 42, it's almost half. And then we had one with 87 properties and 26 addresses that didn't match up to the owner of the property. So you can see the difference. Obviously, this little one, 22 properties, a couple of renters, that cost them another $10, okay? Or actually only another $5. The 42 property case, that's only $2.64 to add that one renter in. And then we have 75 addresses. Theirs went from the 197, which is what they would have done under our current system, and it jumped to 308 because of those 42 non-owners of property in the notification area. And then the same thing holds true for the last one. That's a zoning case that had a 1,000-foot notice, and it went from $229, which is what it would cost us today, to just under 300. Okay. Any questions on that chart?
These are just city costs. These aren't the owner's, developer's costs.
No, this is just city costs on notifying people with a letter, except for that one where I said over here under applicant, the applicant actually pays the title company to provide us those addresses. Okay.
Have we ever considered having the applicant pay for the mailing as well?
They generally pay for it through their fees, although the fees we charge don't cover everything. But yeah, I mean, certainly that's an option to line item that.
Mary, that's one of my questions.
Mhm.
What is the line item? If you said $2 and what was it per notification?
Yeah, $2.64 is our estimate right now on.
Okay, a breakdown of that is any labor but staff in
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, if you go just north of that, it says notification letter and envelope, 50 cents. Staff labor, we estimated at 42 cents a minute. And then postage at 0.455. And then we estimated how many minutes it takes, and
The 455 is the nonprofit rate, is that right?
yeah,
But that means you have to pay extra if the letter's returned to you, correct?
I imagine we do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because, yeah.
Yeah.
So postage return might be the other like
Might actually
it's a
be.
bad address, then you pay, I think, the 50 cents to get it back.
I hadn't thought to add that, but yeah. And we'll get a few of those, but not on every case. Any other questions on this little chart?
I think it's
John?
very good.
Okay, all right. Next slide, please. All right, so we estimated what might it cost for last year, 2022. We had 211 cases that required this notification letter. We have our average cost of $2.64. The average number of notifications per case is now estimated at 70 letters going out. So the notification cost for owners only would run about $39,000 a year. The notification cost, if we included those non-owners of property within the area, and here I estimated at 20%. And that would bump it up to about $47,000, difference of $7,800. And then the notification cost, if we assume 25%, that would bump it up to about $9,700. So we'd be right at about $49,000 instead of $38,000. Now, we only took estimates. We could certainly dig deeper, pull out, I don't know, 4 months worth of cases and see if we can refine those numbers. But I think this is a good estimate to think about.
Hey, Mary, on this estimate, so this is just for zoning cases, is that correct?
Well, anything that required a letter, yes, zoning actions.
Because I see it says average number of notifications per case is 70, which matches up with zoning case up above at 70. So does this estimate include the other types, conditional use, plan unit development?
Yes. Are you thinking my 211 is wrong?
No,
But it was anybody that required a letter.
okay. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm so slow on this one, but okay, 211 in terms of the number of cases, but you'll notice that the average number of cases is 70, which would be higher than for conditional uses, plan unit development, et cetera, because we see that the number of letters is lower for those case types. So in fact, I think the estimate is probably more conservative in terms of being a higher cost than what it would be if we multiplied it based on those averages.
Okay.
Have we talked to the city or county legal department to get an opinion on whether, according to code or law right now, we could add non-owners to this notification process?
We know that as far as notification letters go, all they say is in a city, you must notify property owners within 200 feet.
Right.
Okay, so.
Limited to
and
property owners.
Well, no, I haven't asked law that question. I don't know if they say only property owners, but that there has to be a notification within 200, but we can go beyond that, and we do. So your question is about, may we send notification letters to non-property owners?
Yes.
We can always do more than the law requires, right? We can always do more than the law requires. So
On notification, we
Right.
can, yes.
and so current notification, I believe, is property owners is all that's required, because if it was more than that, we'd already be notifying more because we followed the law, right?
True.
So, but I strongly believe that, especially as the economy continues to go, lifelong or long-term renters are always going to be a part of our communities. And I believe they have got to have a voice in the living conditions on their block, their street, their neighborhood. Now, I'll also say that I'm amazed when I was a developer, I would walk and I would knock on the doors on every side of the street on the block where I was going to build a house and meet the occupants, renter or owner, whatever they were, in person, let them know what we were doing. And then I built houses block to block to block to block. And it was amazing to me. I built 5 houses on this block. And then next year I go to the next block and go block to block. And they had no idea houses were being built on the house block before them. Because we all leave our house, we go to the end of the street, we turn the same direction every time. So I feel like my point is, I think the 200 feet notification is pretty good. The neighboring movement, they say, no, the 7 doors you can see from your house are really what people consider as their neighborhood. So I feel like the distance is really good and actually generous. And the renters in those areas are the ones who we really need to make the effort. And if the extra cost is borne partly by the applicant, because they're paying for more title name, or they're paying for more letters to get the names of the address plus the name of the owner in some cases. And then if we really look at our fee structure and up it enough to help cover the cost of the additional processing, then I think we've raised our rates to cover the cost to make sure in our community people know what's happening in their neighborhood. Amen. End of sermon.
Is there any, yes, Mr. McKay.
And tell me who is going to do the collection of the renters, if you do a renter notification also? Who's going to be responsible for getting that?
When you run a property tax list,
You won't get on a property tax list, and the title people go back basically the same way. So that means either the staff or the person that's making the application has to do the door-to-door knocking like you do.
The way that this is written up is the way that could be accomplished would be to send a letter simply to the physical address as well as to the owner, because sometimes there's an owner that lives in Florida. And in that case, we would send it to the property here in Wichita that's in the notification area as well as the owner that's in Florida.
And I would,
1900 South Green, the property tax evaluation, 1900 South Green, Wichita, Kansas, 67214. The property owner lives in Florida and their address is the one we got, and it's not at 1900, and it's very easy on the property tax list to see all the addresses within that block or within that range.
So how's that addressed? Is it addressed to occupant or is it
It
addressed
is.
to the
we don't have the
the
names.
landlord?
Right.
Yeah, we don't have the names of these people. We have addresses.
Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
then it's going to your house. So,
But if it's a
Okay,
renter, you
next
don't
slide,
necessarily
type in.
know who it is.
right. No, you aren't going to know their name.
Okay.
Okay.
This might.
No, I'm not advocating the city staff going knocking door to door, but
Okay, but
it's an
what-
effective relationship building strategy. And sometimes I think our developers, or like folks that want to put a duplex on a block, we don't know who they are. We're always afraid of anybody we don't know, right? We are always afraid of somebody we don't know. So if you don't notify the renters, then you get the protests that like, we don't want you here because we don't know who you are and what you're doing. So I think, you help yourself by communicating effectively up front.
On a one-to-one basis, I agree with you, Ann. But let's say, for example, I want to put a project in, and there's an apartment project with 100 apartments. You're going to send one to every one of there. So right now, you got one vote against 100 property owners that say, I don't want it.
Could we,
That's got to be so time consuming.
in multifamily, like multifamily high rise, could that be a communication to the building manager or posted notices, like where we'd add that as signage? Could accommodate that situation?
It's an interesting question, and I'm glad that it came up in this format. Mary, have we talked about the approach that we would, or an approach that might be possible with multifamily?
Well, I think it would take the cooperation of the property manager. I think of, if you go out to Central and Ridge and just go north of that, between that and the Sedgwick County Park, you've got 3 apartment complexes. I mean, can't recall, but there's several hundred in each apartment complex. So we'd have to know their numbers to find out.
What I would suggest is that for an apartment building, the way that this would be done by the title company is by the parcel and who's the registered owner. And if they don't match up, then you know that it's likely a renter. For a single family house, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
For an apartment, there would not be other listed owners. There would just be the one owner. So I would think if you send it to the physical address where the apartment is, and then you send it to the owner, that's 2 letters. but I think it accomplishes the intent of at least making sure that the physical address gets notification. I think a complicated one would be a condominium unit where there are multiple owners, because in that case, then if we did it to the owners and there's, let's say there's 10 of them in a building, each one of those properties would get a notification sent to it as well as to the owner.
But they're property owners, condominiums. Right.
Correct.
Right.
But if it is possible, I guess, to rent, to own a condominium and then lease it out. And in that case, then if it didn't match up the record, then there would be someone assumed to be renting there. So you would send it to both locations.
Right.
Okay, we're talking, primarily all we've been talking about is residential.
Yeah.
Okay, how about commercial now? Let's take Rock Road and Harry area. You got so much commercial in there. If you send one out to every tenant, the shopping center on the southwest corner of that, it's got, I don't know, 25 or 30 tenants. And you got to go around the other, that's where I have a problem. You either gonna have to say it's for residential only this, that, but if you go, you got to set a separate set of rules for commercial and multifamily. I don't think one will cover all.
When you think about our zoning though, Bob, Mr. McKay, most of the time the commercial is going to go in a commercial area and there might be a fringe of residential. I don't think you're going to as often, I mean, what you're going to do is there's going to be more multifamily near those commercial. So if we had a good strategy for the multifamily, that would help.
I think it could be treated very similar to the apartment scenario where you send one to the property owner and you send one to the physical address. And you don't look for who are the tenants, similar to a rental. I think it's only based on ownership would be the one where you start to see ownership is different than the physical address.
My only comment is that I don't think you can do a carte blanche system. It's going to have to say this for that. And, in this city for years, we would zone property, but until it was platted, it wasn't going on a zoning map as zoning, whatever it might be. We got that changed, 5 or 6 years ago, simply because people coming in and wanted to buy a piece of ground. Well, it's zoned this, but until you go out and spend all your money, it's not approved. So that got changed to where the zoning became zoning.
This is one of the reasons why I appreciate you and this committee so much, is because you bring different perspectives and questions that, we're thinking about at a baseline level. You've just elevated it to real world implications. And so if you would like, what we can do is kind of look at some possibilities about how those might be addressed and then bring them to you something on paper so you can look at it.
Well, you will run into this combination differential deals in new subdivisions more than you will the older ones, because there's multi-uses going on at the same time, covered under the same area. And that's one of the problems that I can see happening.
Could we set it up to start with like anything that's single family residential to multi, like you're starting at that base level where there are really neighborhoods as the way to test for a year? Because I think it's the neighborhoods that are most active. I think multifamily, they're kind
Yeah, I can't remember in the past of getting people upset about being notified from multifamily ever. I mean, it's always single family.
well, the one where we were going to put the car wash in their front yard and, like
right.
that one.
Right, that's the first one I remember.
But owners, that was a condo place where you were an owner, so they did get notified.
Mr. Warren, did you have a comment?
A couple comments. Not really interested in seeing staff spend a lot more time on it until we know this is the direction we want to go. I'm going to be opposed to anything that's going to add cost to the applicants, because I think in most of these cases that the bureaucratic costs are already high enough, and I don't want to go to that. And then I've got a fundamental objection to adding people that are going to be protesting when they don't own. I mean, as a renter, they can on a moment's notice pull up stakes and head out the door.
But I don't think they'd be able to protest. All they'd be able to do is, well, they could come
They can
in person, but
yeah.
I mean, not a formal protest petition.
They can't do a
sign that.
petition, but they can fill this room. And they have no ownership stake in it.
Well, there's no way to ID
But
if
it's where
that
they
person
live.
that's testifying found out a notification and doesn't even live in that property. I mean,
The notifications we got now, I think all of these zoning require signage on the property. That's enough for me.
Mary, I don't think this requires action on.
It does not. We're
So
really in the middle of
appreciate
this
the input
discussion.
on this very much.
Yeah.
I would say at this point, why don't we move on? I think we've got plenty to think about
Yeah.
here.
I just wanted to share with you very quickly, this is what an ownership list looks like. It's oftentimes several pages, 6, 7, 10, maybe more pages. And what they provide most of the time is a property description, which is a legal description, not an address. And then in the far right column, you see they'll have a mailing address for the owner. You go down 4 of them and you've got somebody from Florida. Okay, that's how we would know that we would need to notify someone at that address. Or if it's a different zip code, things like that. So just sharing that with you. I asked one of the title companies, one of those that it's all around town, they have many, many offices, if they could add the address. And they wanted, yeah, and they didn't want $15 per address, they wanted 18. What? Yeah, now they're not the only one, and there are title companies out there that actually provide the site address. Just a little FYI on that, so, okay. Are you getting ready to go, Mr. Johnson? Okay. Fine.
Okay, Mary has the next item as well. It's an open letter from Wynn to change the planning department. I guess it's tied to this as well, right?
It is. I just wanted to share with you, we received a copy from Wichita Independent Neighborhoods, and it concerned a lot about notification. Some of these ideas are that more people should have the right to protest, which is a state law. We're not in a place to change that. So you can see on here, because I know we're running out of time here, that the things under the red where it says staff review, that was our response to them. This came to the city council, they forwarded it to us. So we shared with them the notification distances and things like that. So I know I'm being real quick on this, but that's what this was. And you can see that they understand some of it and that we do notify within a certain area, but the parts on protest petitions, it's really out of our hands at this point. Did you have any questions on this, or did you have a chance to look at it? Same thing on signage.
Yes, Scott?
I would just point out, sir, that there are representatives of Wynn here in attendance at the meeting. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. Well, we'll give them a chance to comment at the end of the meeting as we normally do in this meeting. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate those comments. The next 2 items have Scott's name on them. So if you would like to talk about performance majors and the next one, well, let's see, it was project updates and performance measures.
Sure. And I'll try and cover these in brief, given the time. And as always, please follow up with me if you have any questions. So the first one is, it's really not project updates, should be MAPD updates. But Ty Ben, if you want to bring up that Word document and just share the screen, we'll just go through a couple quick charts. Great, thank you. So the first one then is, these are typical graphs that we see. This is non-subdivision items. The green line is 2022. The blue line is 2023. And you can see that it's fairly steady. We've taken this all the way out through, I think, beginning of March, because of course we get applications that we schedule for about a month later. So just so you can see what's coming forward. So it looks, of course, we had a lot of cases on the last agenda. And on this one, we're settling down lower so everyone catches a breather. Next graphic, please. These are the number of cases. And again, this is through early March with 52. We ended last year with 214. So we're pretty much on pace to meet what we did last year. So it'd be interesting to see if that trend continues, but we'll talk about overall trends in the next item. Next graphic, please. This is subdivision items per MAPC meeting, and we've been really busy with subdivision items. They caught a break for the first meeting of the year, but after that, they've been moving pretty quickly. And next graphic, please. And the blue line is this year's. This is subdivision cases at MAPC. I think that number is 11, looks like. And so I expect that we will probably exceed what happened last year, just given the trend that we can see from the prior years. Next graphic, please. Good. This is a new count that we're doing. We're counting the number of lots in subdivision plats that you all review. And you can see the last year was first year we were counting this. We finished just below 2,000. So far this year, we have 546. And what that tells me is that we've had some very large plats that have come through. I'm also aware of a couple of large plats that are scheduled for in the near future. So there are a number of lots that are going to be coming online in the future. Next graphic, please. This is the table that you can reference in the handout, just gives you the counts for each of the meetings. There's been a couple of times at least that we've exceeded our regular staff capacity, and they've been able to get through it, which we've been really fortunate for. So no further comments on that at this time. Next slide. Next graph. And then the table with the counts. In addition, on this handout, there are a number of updates on the various projects that we've got going on, and I'll just verbally give those to you. We don't have to reference those in the graphic type in. Oh, there's a section on staffing. We are currently hiring for 2 positions. I'll just point that out. A senior planner position, Stephen Banks, and then one of the new associate planners in the current plans division. We continue to keep an eye on future retirements. We've got Neil Strahl retiring at the beginning of next year. So we want to get folks hired to learn from him as soon as possible. Short-term rentals, we've taken that out to all of the DABs and received feedback. We're working on putting together a public input packet so that you can refer to that in the future. So we'll distribute that as soon as we get that ready. Wasn't quite ready for this meeting. Next one is solar energy conversion systems. We are working on scheduling a presentation of the Board of County Commissioners at one of their workshops. And we have, just as a side note, we have heard indication that there may be a large solar application coming into the planning department. We don't know the specific timing on it, but I assume that it will be fairly soon. So out in Western Sedgwick County. Nightclubs still on hold. Just haven't gotten the time to dedicate on that one yet, but we're close. Daycare, that will be going to the city council probably on February 21st. So stay tuned on that one. Places for people, incentives, land bank, and zoning code updates. No status updates on those. And then duplex designs. That one we're going to be on pause for a little bit. We got through most of the DAB meetings. And we paused before District 4 because we want to have an opportunity to have some more dialogue and also consider the approach on that one. So that's where we are with MAPD updates. Any questions on those? Or?
There's no questions. Thank you, Scott. Next item is any comments from the public, present or virtual. If there is, you're limited to 3 minutes. Yes, please state your name and address.
Sure. My name is Trish Heilman. I live at 139 South Fountain. I'm a treasurer on the College Hill Neighborhood Association and served in that on the board for quite a few years. I just wanted to quickly jump in and talk about the notification part of the meeting that you had, and thank you for looking at that. And I'm also a board member of WIN, so I'll also speak to this open letter here regarding notification, and just wanted to make a couple comments. I wanted to echo Mrs. Fox's comment about renters and the fact that, we have in different neighborhoods a lot of renters. Sometimes, 40, 60, 80% of a neighborhood might be renters. And I think that in our planning process, valuing them, I think would be really important. I know in our neighborhood association, renters are automatically members of the neighborhood association. You don't have to be just a homeowner. So it's not like an HOA. And I think we want Wichita to be a quality place to live, whether you own the place or whether you rent the place. And I think we can say that to people by saying, we're not disenfranchising you by not informing you of what's going on in your neighborhood. I think that's really important, that we make sure that we're, you know, saying, hey, we value you because you are a huge part of our community. It's not just if you own property around here. There are a lot of people who rent for many, many years and sometimes for all their life. The other thing I just wanted to touch base on was in the planning process, when we're talking about feet, there are neighborhoods where people don't, you know, that they barely even know their neighbors and they don't step outside that 200-foot area. And there are neighborhoods where you walk every day and you know all your neighbors, and what goes on 1,000 feet away is absolutely important to your value. And I think that's part of the planning process's role, is to make sure that one person, what they want to do with their property doesn't negatively impact other people's value. And I think that that doing that, expanding out again of 1,000 to 1,000 feet as a city in that notification process, not even talking about the protest process, but the notification process. I think that really will help to make sure that the people whose property really could be impacted negatively are given at least a heads up to be engaged. And I think that's a really important thing for our city to really be forthright, to make every good effort to engage people when it involves their property and their living conditions. Thank you. Probably don't have questions.
Comments.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Richard Ruth. I'm at 3907 East Funston Street. And I submitted this open letter on behalf of some members of neighborhood associations. One of the things that jumps out at me is the references to the state statutes that was not included as part of this. And that's something I think that WIN needs to work on, is making sure that when public, what opportunities for public discourse occur, that the public is properly educated on some of these ramifications that will influence the conversation. So it's good. I'm glad that you included this, and I'm glad that you did this the staff review. I do have a copy of the environmentally sensitive areas. It was drawn up for cell towers in particular, but these are basically areas of the city that are deemed important enough to be considered when development occurs. Notification with no response, I don't think was really addressed by staff review, but that's something that we might, unless I just missed it. But currently, you know, when something doesn't come back, our understanding is that that counts as a default yes for whatever the request is. So that is a concern. To be sure that the pulse of the neighborhood is taken. The fact that protest petitions don't always line up correctly. We understand that it's kind of random. It depends on when these things are submitted. But when something is submitted and we know that it's going to be outside of that, it's not going to hit DAB, the applicant could merely be told that this is a situation where it will need to go through DAB. So your speedy timeline is maybe delayed because of the need for DAB members to know about this. One of the things that I hear about the notification signage is that it's illegible. And so I understand that there are some requirements around this, but my concern is either because of rain damage or because of placement, they're simply illegible. Sometimes they're next to a bush so that the main arteries of travel would not even make it visible to the person. Okay. And then the inclusion in the rendered process, I think a lot has been said about that, but I just like to say that, you know, I go to a lot of neighborhoods where people rent and they don't have the option to just get up and move. It's an expensive process. In fact, you talk to some of the people in some of these things, they say they're doing 99 plus life because they absolutely cannot get rid of where they live. They can't go anywhere. They can't sell and afford anything else. There's also rental requirements. You have a certain amount of time that you're going to spend there that you can't leave without fines. So these are some of the considerations. It's an interesting conversation. Certainly a lot of food for thought that we've gotten from staff. So we appreciate your time on this.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that has comments at this time, either present or virtual? If not, we'll bring it back, and I believe we have completed the agenda. The next meeting will be March 9th. And with that, we stand adjourned.
Well, that was the alarm.